Hello, AV Tweeps and AV Tweeps adjacent. Welcome to brAVe Space, or in this case, brAVe Skills. brAVe Skills is a practical offshoot of the brAVe Space podcast, where we explore some of the topics most impactful to the world of business, corporate culture, and leadership. I'm Britt.
And I'm Leon. And like the title says, we want to focus on skills with this show. So we hope that something in this episode is helpful for you, or by extension, someone you know.
Before we get started here, we do have some disclaimers for you. The first is that opinions expressed are our own and not necessarily representative of our institutions, companies, or sponsors of the show. And the second is that we appreciate listeners' grace and understanding as we tackle topics we're not necessarily experts in.
Now, on to the episode.
So, Leon, for episode 2, you picked the topic and you wanted to talk about the perils of ambition. So first, tell me why. Why did you pitch that topic?
Sure. So a couple things have come to my mind recently kind of related to this idea, but I think I'd take a step back and just recognize or say out loud that I see leadership, you and I both actually feel the same way, that we see leadership as a service. That it's a service to people. It's not a crowning achievement. It's not necessarily an end goal. It's something that you do for others. And also because you and I both work in technology, and a lot of the listeners to this podcast work in technology, we work in service industries. Technology is a service industry, so we value service. And because of that, we oftentimes also find ourselves thinking about the topic of servant leadership. And when it comes to good leadership, one of the thoughts that carries through oftentimes when you talk to people is that you do need to practice this idea of giving credit, and giving credit to those who may not be seen by others, which oftentimes can be folks in technology. That's a key component of good leadership, right? But we also live in an age where personal branding is kind of a hot topic, and we live in an age where we talk a lot about being seen ourselves as well. So I wanted to talk about some practical advice when it comes to dealing with this idea of credit for work, basically. Another thing that comes to mind often whenever I discuss the idea of teams is this concept of a team is the sum of its parts. It's not just the parts. And oftentimes when I'm talking to AV people or even to clients of AV, we'll kind of ask this question here, like what makes, like, close your eyes for a second and think, what makes a great AV experience or in a concert or a museum or a dance hall or a movie theater or whatever? Is it just the audio? Is it just the video? And most of us would say no, right? It's the sum of those two things working together. And so when we talk about this idea of credit, I think it's important for us to think about the fact that all success as well, all outcomes are really the sum of the parts working together, right? It's not just the A in audiovisual. It's not just the V in visual or any other kinds of fields you want to put things together with. And so that's part of why that comes to mind so strongly for me. But I will be honest, there was a quote that I stumbled upon recently as well that just kind of hit me, and I'm just going to quote her. It's Mary Kay Ash, who is the founder of the Mary Kay Incorporated company. I think a lot of us know about the products that they sell. And she said, there are two things that people want more than sex and money. She said they are recognition and praise. Mm-hmm. So this idea of understanding that recognizing the parts in success or the parts when it comes to outcomes really seems to hold true across the board, regardless of whether you're talking to a CEO of a makeup brand or you're talking about leading your team of technicians or staff in a college or things like that. Recognizing that a leader is never wholly responsible for an outcome, I think, is just a good kind of practice to have.
Yeah. So what really struck me when you pitched this as a topic is the idea of ego, and how I think it's so natural for humans to reside in their ego, especially when you have moved up the theoretical chain and you are in a formal leadership position. And I think that you need to learn to release that ego and to see yourself as a member of your team, and to not be so in your own ego that you take the credit for the work of your teammates because you're the quote unquote leader. And I love that quote about recognition and praise. I think that's so true. And Sean Aker in The Happiness Advantage also had said something along the lines of, you know, you don't tell your employees that their value is just because you're paying them. I'm super paraphrasing, but like,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's more than the money that you give them. It's more than just they're being your little worker bees or whatever. Like,
Sure.
recognition and praise is a huge part of making an employee feel valued and to ultimately get the best work out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if everyone who's listened to this has ever happened to play a certain video game. Uh, Statistics would say that most people have, but there's a video game called The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. My wife actually loves this game, and I've watched her play it, and I think it's very funny. Regardless of whether you understand how the game works, here's something that I think everyone can understand. At some point in the game, the main character needs to get on a horse, and that horse he needs to tame. And the way that you tame the horse, there's two ways or three ways. You one spend time with the horse. That's the long term way. It's more organic. Two, you feed the horse apples and carrots because they like those. You can call that bribery. And then three, you praise them. You actually just pat the horse whenever they're getting a little bit out of line. And I noticed that people in my family would play this game and just go to tame a horse, and they would just sit and just pat the horse for forever until finally the horse would do what they wanted. They wouldn't take the time to feed the horse. They wouldn't take the time to just spend time with the horse. They would just keep giving them things, just giving them praise. Why am I saying that? Because you mentioned, the idea of kind of dangling a carrot in front of somebody. I think erodes the idea of what makes them valuable if we think that the only way to motivate them is to kind of give them the cookie,
Mhm.
um, I think when a lot of people are working in service industries or service roles, they know that they're probably not going to be highly visible,
Mhm.
and oftentimes the motivation to do a good job doesn't come from that. But that doesn't mean that it's something we should ignore either as leaders. That people still need it, even if people aren't asking for that. But I also think that it contributes to trust. I think a team can find it way easier to trust a leader if they're seeing that the leader recognizes what they are doing, and not only recognizes it to them, but recognizes it outwardly, recognizes it in the presence of other people, so that their recognition that is very easy to put on, or the spotlight is, it's very easy to put the spotlight on someone who might have a leadership title or has kind of stepped out in that way in a very visible way. But that person kind of reflecting, you know reflecting that those good vibes essentially back to other people, I think is something that brings the trust that teams need. Yeah. So
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it can also be such a strong culture builder in a lot of ways. But one of the ways is also tying your praise to the mission. So letting people know, I saw that you did this thing really well. That was important because. And really unpacking for them, like, I see you and I see that what you did was important and valuable and moved us forward in a positive direction because we are collectively trying to achieve this goal. You moved us toward a goal, or you were really working in the spirit of our organization. And I think it's important to be specific in that way too,
mm,
because you're always kind of modeling behavior, right? And so to model that, full and meaningful praise gives it actual meaning versus a blanket statement of, you're doing a good job. That was great. Like, I mean, sometimes it's nice to give a blanket statement because the blanket makes sure you're kind of doing a catch all. Like, a leader doesn't always know what the nitty gritty is or what everyone is doing.
Sure.
But I think there needs to be a balance between blanket for praise and very specific. This is why what you did was so important.
Yeah. Yeah. You had mentioned this idea when we had chatted a little bit before about whether or not too much praise or too much credit could be a bad thing, right? You're giving too much credit, and that really seems to hold true there. If it's too much, it may also have little value. If there's
Mm,
too much, if it's just general and not specific, then it kind of loses value. I know people have said that before about the phrase "I love you," which I think is it's odd. But they're like, man, if you always say "I love you," then how do you know if it matters? I'm like, well, I don't really know if that's exactly the best example, but I get the idea that
right.
when you say it, it should mean something, and sometimes it loses weight um, if you're not being more specific, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're so I mean, my wife loves if I just call her pretty, but like if I say, "Hey, you're so pretty," that's fine, and I can say that every day. But if I say something like, "Oh my gosh, your eyes," I'm getting more specific. It
Mm-hmm.
feels like I'm thinking more about it, so it doesn't feel like I just made it up because I'm checking a box. Um, you know,
Yes. Yeah. It really should answer your like core questions, the who, the what, the when, and the why. So, this person did this thing at this time of year or week or whatever. And I'm highlighting that because, like this is why that action was important to our team.
yeah. What if, let's think of a scenario, we're talking about things as though everything is kind of sunshine and roses. I realize it's kind of an ideal scenario, of course, with no real constraints on it. But let's flip a little bit and think about this idea of, you're in a role where you are doing good things, you're doing what you're supposed to, you're connecting to the mission. But what if you don't feel seen by your manager? What if you don't think you're getting credit for things that you should be, and you're concerned that the work itself may not actually be noticed?
Yeah, that's a tough spot to be in, and I think that for each individual person that's going to be unique depending on your relationship with your manager, because some people feel like there's a significant disconnect between them and that person for whatever reason, and I think that is the most challenging to navigate versus you're touching base with that person regularly. You might have a good relationship with them. It's just giving praise or giving recognition doesn't really seem to be a part of their repertoire. So I feel like depending on which situation you're in, that's going to depend upon how you broach this. What would you say?
I think, if you're a leader that's hearing people say like, "I think you're not noticing me," then hopefully you're really paying attention to this episode here. If you are if you're concerned that something that you're doing may not be noticed, and I would say this to leaders too, especially while you're busy giving credit for others, to others. This is where, in my experience, having a means of checking in, a deliberate means of checking in about progress, makes a big difference. So, having built in check ins, talking with your manager and saying, "I really like it if, once, twice a quarter or something, we're just specifically talking about me and my progress and like where I can improve." But by doing that, you're also having to acknowledge what you're doing. And so you get a
Mm,
chance to make sure people see it. I think you're very correct that oftentimes a manager may not know, a leader may not know everything about what their people are doing. If they're not micromanaging them, chances are they don't. And they have that trust. That's a good thing. There's a double-edged sword, though, where if you're a really introverted person or very humble, you may not show all the things necessarily as outwardly, though I think a leader should still be paying attention to the outcomes in general of their people. So, with the idea of that built in check in time, one of the things that can be really useful as well, in my experience, has been writing things down. That helps when someone takes credit for something that they shouldn't. For one, we've got something written down that showed like, no, so and so did this actually, or at least so and so was a part of it. That can be really, really useful. Also, because when you're really busy, honestly, I think sometimes we forget all the things that we've just done in the past month or quarter or whatnot,
Mhm.
because it seems like a year ago. So that's good for so many other reasons. Even the idea of just being able to look back and feel a little bit good for a moment when you're hitting that moment of feeling kind of down
Mhm.
about the progress and things aren't going the way that you want them to. But yeah, my experience and my advice is to speak to the manager to make sure that those check-ins are there if that doesn't exist, um, and recognize that starting a conversation, managing up, if you will, is
Mhm.
not a bad thing. Hopefully, it's rewarded. Hopefully, you don't get a bad response. But it's a great skill to practice, and hopefully the leader will value that as well. They'll be humble enough to value the fact that you're wanting to make sure this is built into your practice, built into your culture, and that you care about your own progress and success as well. You know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a one-on-one is a great time to have that conversation. And I totally agree about documenting everything. So make sure those notes get into that agenda. Make sure your one-on-one has an agenda.
Mm.
um, and I also like to personally document things for myself. So I have a goal tracking slash achievement tracking spreadsheet that I fill out monthly. And so I'll write up at the top, this is what I'm looking to accomplish this month. And then as the month progresses, I'll keep my notes there to say, like, yep, on this date or in this rough time frame, this is the work that I did that aligns with these goals for this month. And so even if my manager and I don't have the time to sit down, which I know that sounds crazy to be like, you go a whole month without having a formal sit down. Well, it's higher ed. So sometimes.
Mhm.
But, you know, he at least can reference this document if he needs to.
Yeah, yeah. Um, the idea of giving credit is it's not a slippery one. It can be a tricky one for people who are service minded because you
Mhm.
do think more about the other people, but there is a place where you do need to own things for yourself as well. I think it's also good to realize that this is good for the team. If you're making sure that things are being recognized, um, with you, by doing so, you may also be motivating folks to notice things that are going on elsewhere as well. So withholding that is kind of not helpful for the team. It's not even just about you. Um, Model what you want to see and try to build what you want to see other people do, as well. But there's a flip to this, of course, and there's the idea of kind of taking too much credit, right? So earlier, I think I was saying oftentimes a good leader will give more credit than they take for successes, and oftentimes take more credit for failures than they
Mhm.
allow other people to take or that they would give to them.
Mhm.
And that is not necessarily bad when you say it as, I guess that would actually sound kind of elegant the way I put that. I don't usually get that. But when you say it like that doesn't sound like anything's wrong with that, right? That sounds like this is all a good thing. But is there, you know, when it comes to successes or failures, how do you know when you're taking too much credit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think like for successes, I would say you have to try to remove yourself from your ego and,
Mhm.
recognize how your team is achieving things individually, even if it might be with your guidance. For failures, I think if you take too much ownership over it, that it's stops your team from learning and growing because they're going to say, oh, well, they always take the fall for it. So there's no consequence to me. What does it matter? So I know I think it's important to, obviously you don't want to ever throw someone under the bus. You don't want to correct someone in front of another person. Like, these conversations should be had delicately and sometimes more privately. But I don't think that a failure is entirely on the leader unless it was truly the leader's failure. It was a task that
Mhm.
they were personally
Mhm.
responsible
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. Yeah. No one likes to be in trouble. No one likes to be in trouble. No one likes to know that they did something poorly, and it can be even more challenging to express out loud to others that that happened if you're the one that realizes it. But I think that it's going to be good to think about this idea of building trust again. If you are a leader that will own your own mistakes,
Yes.
recognize when it's your mistake. I think just by doing that, you are modeling for people that it's safe to do that.
Hmm.
So, isn't it better when your team member or teammate brings the problem to you and says, "Here's where I just messed up"? That's a much better way to find out than you finding out on your own later, right? And then it's like, were you trying to hide this? I don't know if you did. You know this? This is a problem. Now we have to talk about it in a different way. Owning up to your mistakes builds trust within leadership, within teams, but it models that it's okay to not be perfect. We just need to be able to say this happened, and can we move on from this. Um, I I think it's good to reference something here that is I wouldn't say it's an elephant in the room maybe, but I can imagine that there are listeners who might think about this concept of having this abused,
Mm.
um, having the idea of taking credit for failure, if you're doing so, having that be abused by others. So if you're concerned with being seen yourself, maybe you're in a new role or something, but you've got this kind of inner motivation to apologize for the team's mistakes, maybe more profusely than you should. I've been made. You mentioned this as well, that sometimes gender
Mhm.
and expectations on gender kind of make that a slippery slope. Um, I would like to have you put that in your words, actually, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we, believe it or not, listeners, we prepare for this podcast. So we had
A little
some,
bit.
pre-notes. And one of the things I had written is, when you are taking ownership over failure, to be very mindful of apologizing. I think that it is more powerful to keep it statement based. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your understanding. We have been working on this thing. This did not go right. Moving forward, we are going to do this thing. So, recognizing that it was a problem, recognizing that it was frustrating for this other person, just acknowledging this did not go well,
Mhm.
and saying how you're going to fix it. I think how you are going to fix it is the most important piece to this puzzle. And "I'm sorry" should not be a part of this equation unless you're genuinely sorry, unless you really have a reason to be apologizing here. And I think that is especially important for women to hear, because men do it as well, but I feel like it really more skewed toward women to apologize for just existing. I don't know how many times I have knocked on my boss's door and the first words out of my mouth were, "I'm sorry." I'm sorry for what?
Yeah.
For literally existing?
Mhm.
Like, no,
Mhm.
I'm not actually sorry for that. So, just being aware of, like, an apology is for when you truly need to apologize. And even a failure doesn't necessarily need an apology. Like,
Mhm.
sometimes it just is what it is. Stuff happens. Tell them, "Thank you for putting up with this, and here's how we're going to make it better."
Yeah. I really, really, really hope there are a lot of people hearing this. I am not a woman. I found myself saying exactly what you just said. And when I think about it, I'm realizing that I have actually probably spoken about this more times to a woman that's on my team than to a man. But either way, I think that, there's like nature and nurture here. People could be listening to this in other countries. Maybe they've got different ideas when it comes to patriarchy or anything like that. But regardless of sort of where you sit in terms of a balance of power, naturally speaking, kind of the way that people think about it, I think everyone should really take that to heart, that a failure is not necessarily a failure in the way that we always think about it. Sometimes a failure is just it just means that what we were going for didn't happen. That does not necessarily mean that it's the worst thing in the world. A failure is not a crisis. A failure does not reflect anything on your character. It doesn't even necessarily reflect anything on your capacity or your ability necessarily. And in all honesty, in business, we should be less risk averse than we sometimes are, which means we should be open and expect failure. And if you're afraid to fail because the culture of the organization makes you afraid to fail, they'll throw all the blame on one person. They'll look for the scapegoat. No one wants that. No one should have that most of the time. If you're afraid to fail, that also means you never risk anything. You never try the new thing. And the fact that you failed sometimes happens because you're the front runner, you're the trendsetter, you're the one that put themselves on the line and put themselves out there. That should be applauded. Okay, you failed, but you know what? You failed so that now no one else has to. Right? There's lessons to be learned here, like you were saying, and being afraid to make a mistake is a surefire way to kill, or having people be afraid to make mistakes is a surefire way to kill a culture that you probably want to have built in your organization. So I thank you for mentioning that and saying that and speaking that from that perspective, because it is something that we should talk a lot about. We should recognize we work in an industry that's very much male dominated, and there's there can be an absence, I think, sometimes of that perspective when it comes to big stages, or platforms and things. So, we want to give voice to those kinds of things. Yeah. I'm going to harken back to one other thing that, nope, no, I'm not. Now I have to edit this out because that makes no sense.
We can go wherever you want to go.
Brain fart again. Yeah, brain fart again.
3 hours later.
The idea of recognizing when something goes wrong and then moving forward, I think, is a great way or a great place for us to focus, because while everything we just said is true, and sometimes the balance of power is something we need to think about and we need to address it, there's also this idea that at some point we have to move out of that place too, where we're thinking about it. When someone gets stuck there, if a manager gets stuck there and is thinking about trying to, if they're working with someone who might be overly apologetic for some reason, we have the opportunity as leaders to make sure we're keeping that conversation where it needs to be as well. So help them move past that as well. Encourage them in this, that they don't need to necessarily feel so bad about missing everything or missing some things. But it's really good. It's, again, giving credit. Give credit to the person if they're trying to think through a solution. And if they're not, necessarily help them get there. Help them think through the solution and recognize that just because you mess something up doesn't mean that I don't think that you could also fix said problem, that you could also fix it. Put that, back in their court. You don't have to take things away from them when they're failing. Owning failure is good. I have no idea what just happened. Hey, Britt. I got to be honest. Something just happened with our recorder where I didn't know what you just said. But I'm pretty sure that point landed awesomely. The whole audience is going to hear it before me. Oh, there we go with the thumbs up again.
Do we have a listener question to save us?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay. So this actually came in. This was actually a personal message. So guess what? It's not even the one that I thought we were going to do. This is a personal message. Just as hot off the press. Our listener question is a personal one that someone sent me directly. This person, this is a woman. She got a job offer through an acquaintance of hers, and the site manager at that at that location is offering starting pay that's lower than this woman thought that it would be. She's interested in it being more. She actually has a number in mind that she thought was appropriate. And she's got people telling her that she should ask for more, but she says, I've never done it before. And I feel like I may deter my chances if I try. Any advice?
Oh, yeah, I have advice. Is it okay if I go first?
Yeah.
I don't want to dominate, but I feel really passionate about this. And also, brAVe Space is going to have an upcoming episode with Kelly Campbell where we talk almost exclusively about the wage gap and how people can advocate for better pay. So stay tuned for an episode at length about that.
Mhm.
But I would say absolutely ask. Don't be afraid to do that. Because if you're interested in this being your employer, you need to be comfortable asking for what you need. So if you already feel like there's some block or disconnect where you can't go to them and say, I actually need this might not be a good fit. And in terms of fit, keep in mind they want to fill that role just as much as you might want it. So there's absolutely no harm in going to them and saying, I appreciate this offer. I'm excited about this opportunity. I did have this number in mind.
Yeah. That is actually the exact same advice that I wanted to give as well, with the added encouragement that you don't even know what they're going to say.
Mm.
You don't know what they're going to say. I think the question carries with it. They said they're concerned about them deterring their chances. Well, first off, they got an offer,
Right.
so um, they want you. They've said that they want you. I always like to tell people that an interview or any kind of job seeking endeavor is a two-way street. Like you're saying, you have to feel comfortable with what's being offered. You have to feel comfortable with the place. It's not just about you proving your worth. So a theme in this episode is the idea of self-advocating sometimes, and needing to do that is you need to do that for yourself, but also recognize that they don't know you're uncomfortable unless you tell them.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you don't know what they're going to say. Maybe don't expect a no on that. But even if that were the case, it's ultimately still going to be in your power to make the choice on whether you take this, whether you move away from it. If it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. There are other. You are not going to only receive one job offer.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that in your mind. You're not going to receive only one, and perhaps it's not even unfair pay, but it's not what you are looking for because you matter. In a sea of people in an industry, there's ranges of pay. There's also ranges of locale and cost of living and all of that. What one company is willing to pay for something shouldn't be grossly different from what another would be, but you come with your own needs and those things matter. So you should be empowered to advocate for that. Um, the employer may not have asked you, hey, is that okay? But they're kind of asking you that when they give the offer letter. We'd like you to join, and here's the starting pay. Not great thing that you're joining. We're done. you
Right.
know?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It is entirely within your right to gently push back and say what you are looking for. And you can even back that up with other information as well. So, do your research so that you can say in a similar market and similar company with my credentials, things like that to justify that range that you're looking for. And I would note too, I 100% want this person to say the number that they want and go for this, but I don't know the age or experience of this person. So I want to also add that keep in mind that benefits are also a huge consideration. I think a lot of younger people get hung up on salary and they're not looking at things like medical, dental, vision, life, retirement, but there is a whole package of things that you should be considering. And if you're not super thrilled about salary, but the other benefits are really, really good, that is something to consider. all of that said, still go for the salary that you want. Like still ask for the number you want. But, you know, I wouldn't want to not mention that in case this is a like 20 something who doesn't know that they need insurance.
Well, I do know who this person is. They're a little younger than you and I, but not by much. They are someone. I'll add context to this. This is a person that's not new to their role. They're new to some of the asks of this job. So as they continue talking in the messages, they're saying, you know, I do recognize that I'm maybe not as up to date or as experienced in some of the areas of this role. But to that, I would say it's great that you know that, and hopefully the employer knows that and they're not being surprised by it. But again, I like to reference the fact that they are asking for you. You actually have negotiating power, and I don't know that we always realize that we have that. You're right. They're looking to fill the position and they want you in it. And it should be worth both of your while. So the fact that you may be newer to a certain aspect of the job, I would say clearly doesn't make a whole lot of difference for this employer because they're still offering you said position. So that self-limiting factor, that self-imposition going on there, try to shake that off. Try to shake that off a little bit. But definitely hoping things go well.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, this was good, Leon. Do we do an outro? Is that what we do now?
The takeaways.
We have takeaways.
We do.
This is a brAVe Space offshoot, and brAVe Space has takeaways. I know how to do my own podcast. Leon, what are our action items and takeaways for this episode?
It's fine. You were fine with all this stuff until I came along. You just blew it all up.
You know, sometimes you have to do that in order to just be fresh and vibrant and fun. You just got to blow things up, metaphorically. Sure.
No worries. I can actually do all of them if you wanted to give us our outro.
All right.
I'll do that. All right. So we're so glad that you were able to tune in for this episode. Hopefully you found something helpful in it. And as is the brAVe Space way, as Britt has said, we do have some action items for you. The first one is going to be, when in doubt, you can essentially write it out. Make notes about the things that you're doing, document well, so that if there's ever a question of what you've done, you can prove it with your documents. And a second action item is to share in the glory and the struggle, but don't take all of either. And then lastly, own up to your own mistakes as an example to others, which will help model the behavior that you want to see.
And those are all great ways for us to move forward together. We hope that this episode gave you something new to think about in your professional and personal journey, and maybe even expanded your perspective on your own experiences. If you have any topics that you would like us to discuss on the show, you can let us know using our Google form that you can find in the show notes. You can also message us on X, LinkedIn, the Avixa Exchange. It's pretty easy to find us and reach out to us. If you liked the show, please let us and the world know by giving us as many stars as possible and leaving a review on your podcast player of choice. And for easy updates, be sure to subscribe to brAVe Space.
Can I tell you what was wrong now? Oh, yeah, sorry. There we go. Wait. I did it.
Mine doesn't do it. I don't know what's wrong with mine.
It's not you. I use my phone as my camera, and I think it's built into that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we'll find a way to transfer it over or something. Yeah. I have to tell you what happened when you had disappeared earlier. So I disappeared. I think it just went black. When you disappeared, right before you disappeared, I for sure heard what I thought was a rooster crowing, like a squeal. You were talking and you had opened your mouth, and all of a sudden, I'm sure it was just this weird digital thing on the voice. Audio does weird things with male voices and female voices. And I think it just took a higher pitched voice and just amped that up. So I saw you go, and then I heard, and I was like, well, first off, I'm glad that I noticed that she froze, because I was like, Britt, are you still trying to talk to me? Someone's screaming in your house. Go help them. The podcast isn't that important. We're not saving whales here.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Yeah, and it probably was like a weird digital thing, but I also am paranoid because anytime I record anything, my cat is like, it's my
See, I saw
time
your
to
cat.
shine.
Yeah, I saw your cat in the background. So no, you're right. I bet it was that.
She's like, I'm gonna make noises, I'm going to attack things, I'm going to use my litter box and then create Sand Island where I just go for like as long as possible.
We need to just let your cat join the show, actually. Show mascot. Let's do it.
Yes.